Hello my lovelies, I'm the Small Brit and this is Britfinch. The title and the thumbnail basically say it all. Focusing on my New Year's resolution of finished rather than perfect, I've been trying to do more speed models in 3D of late. Doing my absolute best to shake off my perfectionist, action paralysis tendencies and instead enjoy quick, fun mini projects. So I decided to make a model for my Dispatch original character, Flotsam, aka Wanda, from the previous video. Why? Because I have free will. I like modelling little fellas, and I might have been compelled by the spirit of Flotsam herself. So now we have my version of Sharknado 3D. My aim was to have something that, even if not my best work, could feasibly work as an in-game model, particularly when it came to the poly count. I also wanted to try and combine texture sheets just as a personal exercise, so that in theory Flotsam in just her swimsuit underlayer or in her jacket would share the same material. I always like to put a little bit of extra effort into a character's face, as that's where people's eyes are naturally drawn. Even if it wasn't a perfect one-to-one recreation, I was aiming to be faithful to the key character features of Flotsam, namely her large eyes, big jaws, and the zigzag outline of her jutting teeth. As for elements like the jacket, you can usually get away with lower poly than you'd expect. As I said, most folks are focusing on the face. This go around for time crunch purposes, I decided to just go for a closed mouth model. Perhaps more like a visual test or placeholder than a final model. This let me be a little more playful when sculpting the teeth and jaws without having to confine myself into optimization hell when I was meant to be speed modelling and this isn't actually going into a game. I used a couple of existing assets I already had to hand, including some previous hand and body sculpts, to help me block everything out just to save time. That being said, I was sure to pay attention to things like the scale of the fingers and the stockiness of her body, trying to push the idea of her being a dense little mutant. It was nice to have to actually think a little more about what her body type is like under the big bulky jacket, if anything just to have a reference for future use. The feet were a little tricky as they're mostly designed to be like flippers when in the water, and I tend to kind of hand wave how I draw them otherwise. But I think I managed to strike an alright balance. Certainly with a bit of creative animation and sound effects you could get a slapping, clunky, flipper fin feel to them on dry land. Half of game art direction is usually just clever trickery anyways. While I kept most of the model relatively symmetrical, I tried to break up her design a bit with some asymmetry on the bottom portion of her jacket, which I intended to kind of lean into when it came to texturing. I cut the footage of the retopologizing of the high poly for time and entertainment value, but I would like to once again say I do rather enjoy the retopologizing and UV unwrapping stage if I'm in the mood. Maybe not the most interesting thing to watch, maybe I'll do it again in the future, but plug me in with a good podcast or playlist and I'm vibing my way through it. It definitely helps when you're excited about what you're making and are excited to get to the texturing stage. And speaking of the texturing stage, one of my favourite novel parts of the process is baking my high poly. Without getting too technical, for those less familiar, it's projecting the information from my higher poly sculpt onto the lower poly model, resulting in more detail but with a reduced poly count. That's a bit of an oversimplification, but you hopefully get the gist. For those in the know, I also didn't bother baking my mesh by name, or baking by mesh name this time around, even though I probably should have, purely because I was feeling a little bit lazy. I'm so sorry. Don't look too close. Well, I didn't have much time to get any kind of dispatch-like post-processing, cell shading set up in some in-game software such as Unreal Engine. I was able to find two really great Substance Painter shaders to experiment with, which I'll link below. They were so incredibly useful for checking my speed sculpt as I went along and making sure it was relatively fit for purpose. You'll frequently see me switching back and forth between shaders, allowing me to preview what Flopsom's model would look like using a similar shader to that in Dispatch, if a little cruder. It gave me a good idea of how her shapes and colours would translate, as well as areas that needed extra hand-drawn details to better define them and make them pop. For example, parts of the face and the paneling on her jacket just popped so much better with some additional details hand-painted in. Alternatively, in other areas I scaled back. For example, the thick band of blue on her gum line in the original 2D art, when combined with the outlines from the shader, felt a little too thick. So I ended up leaving them out of the final render. This is why we test these things. It's always fun to see how your 2D concepts translate into 3D. Sometimes you can lose elements but gain others, or make last minute but ultimately necessary tweaks to the design. I do tend to be quite hypercritical of that transition from 2D to 3D when I'm doing both halves myself, but I think that's only because it's easier to nitpick parts of your own work, where you know every nook and cranny and fine detail. If I'd had a bit of extra time, my only major extra goal I'd have liked to aim for is making her mouth able to open, so she'd be fully ready for rigging and animation and all of that good stuff. Anyone out there who is an animator and would like to take a crack at it, please do let me know. That being said, I was overall super pleased with how this came out, especially given I gave myself a relatively short time limit on finishing. My beautiful little sharkfish woman mutant thing is here and ready to party. And with that, we are done, my lovelies. Thank you so much for joining me again today. What do you think of Flopsom's 3D model? Have you taken the leap into the third dimension when it comes to your art, or maybe you're considering it? Let me know in the comments below. The lovely people you see on screen are my Patreon supporters, for whom I would enter any dimension. Not just the third, but maybe even the fourth or the fifth. They let me keep doing what I'm doing and show their support from as little as £1.50 a month. If you would like to join them, do consider following the link in the description below. What are your thoughts on more 3D content? What other things would you maybe like to see me model? Leave me all your thoughts and ideas if you have the time. And speaking of time, my fishy 3D friends, I will hopefully see all of you next time.